How's the content going so far? Yeah, okay, get it, all right. So I will try and make this interesting. So what I'm going to do, my background, so my name's Simon Aspin-Taylor, no one's ever heard of Data Tick, don't worry about that. My background is doing interim chief data and analytics roles. So I've just come out of a role at Lloyd's of London. So just been putting in place something called Blueprint 2, which is the strategy for the insurance marketplace for London. So 1,000 sort of brokers, managing agents and participants in the insurance market, so a data-led strategy. Those of you, I'm sure we all have experience of insurance, will probably know that a couple of things. One is that it's not very data-led today, so that was a real challenge, trying to make it a little more data-led. So I'll try and bring some of that to bear, and before that, you know, roles at Rackspace, Rank, Tesco's, and leading consultancy for data at IBM and things like that. So a bunch of consulting roles, but also owning the data problem as well, which is very different from consulting, talking, walking away and leaving other people to it. So let's kick off. Okay, perfect. So in anything data related, my take from that sort of chief data analytics officer, you're always talking to a CEO, CFO, COO, and saying, talking in their language, and their language is always what's the bottom line to the business. So what I'm going to try and do is do a twin story of both the business story and then bringing out the AI, machine learning, data engineering elements in relation to that. So we'll see where it goes, and we might go for a few thumbs up, thumbs down later on. So really there are only 5 ways, and this is a bit glib, but up front, 5 ways you can generate value. So increasing revenue, reducing costs, reducing risk, increasing customer satisfaction, or employee satisfaction. And underneath that, there are lots of other things, but everything goes into those categories. And so I start off by saying that because no matter what you're doing with data, so whether it's around governance or quality, whether it's around AI, machine learning, architecture, you should always be able to trace it back to what's the business problem. Because you should always assume, and this always happens to me, so I don't see why it shouldn't happen to you too, just saying, a chief exec says, what are you saying? And you can't give them a tech answer to it because it won't mean anything. So talking their language, and that's the starting point. But then, you've got to realize, so in my role, it's actually a competition. And the competition is the business itself. And I just want to explain that a little bit. Because if you're out and saying, someone says, you might be talking to the marketing team, thank you. So always available for top tips. So the marketing team will turn around and say, we want to do some cross-sell. We've got 2 products. We want to know which customers we can move from product A to product B. The marketing team might go off and do that, but they wouldn't have the data engineering skills, the AI skills, and the machine learning skills. So then we're debating who should own the problem, right? So if marketing go and do it themselves, they might build that in, whatever tool, Adobe, CRM, whatever, and not involve data people. And then it all goes wrong because you can't join those data sets. Is that true? Are we talking, yeah. So they go off and do their own thing, and it's not aligned to your data strategy. So at that point, you can't join that to other things. So yes, they solve business problems. So I am just going to say it, we are competing with a business, and data, and you can tell by the grey hair, during my time, 35 years of doing data, used to be so subservient. One of my conclusions is we now need to drive more, and I think we've got the tooling, the capabilities to drive more business outcomes. So you have to realize you're competing, because data is competing against other investment opportunities. If your CEO has, for every £1 million he has to invest in the business, he's going to start by saying, where else can I invest that? So I did that analysis at Rank, and 95% of everything that Rank was going to invest in was underpinned by data. So we went through every single project, apart from a few acquisitions, and even some of those were data-driven. It was a gambling company, we were buying another gambling company, and we bought them because of their data capabilities. So they couldn't say it wasn't about data. So you are competing, but you have to understand that pretty much everything the business does now is going to be driven by data, and that is absolutely critical. This will all come to a bit more techie stuff in a minute. So my argument is it's no longer good enough to be okay. So by that, I mean doing a data project, a data program, you can no longer say we're doing it for its own sake. You actually now need to turn around and saying, we are going to drive revenue, we are going to reduce your costs, we're going to give you something you couldn't do before. It could be innovation, but it will go back to those 5 outcomes. So I just want to sort of, raise of hands, does everyone sort of agree with that in principle? Does that all make sense? So that's a start, we're talking the same language. So it's not always easy to do, I get that. So I'm just going to take you through an example. And that example I will take as a single customer view. Okay, because a single customer view will underpin cross-selling, upselling, understanding who your customers are and everything else. So my simple basis of a single customer view, it could be a thick single customer view or a thin single customer view, but it is ultimately about saying you can go back to one ID for every customer you have and link all customers by product, by region, whatever, back to one ID so that you can see what they're doing. You know who they are, you know what they've bought from you, you know where they exist, what they might do in the future, and you can look at other clusters of customers and do things with, okay? So a single customer view, so let's go into a bit more detail on that. So a single customer view, there are 2 types of benefits. There are benefits to your organization, and there are benefits to your customers. So when you're thinking about the benefits to your business, so that's about protecting your customers and your reputation. So if you do something to a customer where they've only got one product and they've got another product and you don't look after them well, you're likely to lose them as a customer. So understanding those things, absolutely critical. Can you hear okay? Or so a reduced risk of churn. If you don't know your customers well, they'll think you don't understand them, that you're not listening to them, so there's a great chance you might lose them. So single customer view underpins an awful lot of things. Now typically, that's the sort of discussion your marketing department would be having, but I would argue it's not just about marketing, it's also about operations, it's about human resources, interaction with those customers. So actually, because it's across the whole organization, there are very few teams in any company who understand how that comes together. And guess what? Data gets that. You always have to deal with every aspect of an organization. So that's key. And the benefits to the customers, really it is about protecting them a little bit more. GDPR. If you do not know every aspect of a customer, they might say, take me off your list. But if you've got 5 lists, you've got to take them off 5. So actually having one list is a good place to do that. So actually it's really critical that you get a single customer view in place. However, and that's about brands, channels, everything else, okay? So the principle of that is really easy to describe, but it's very difficult to implement. So in order to implement that, clearly we've got large sets of data that all come together. So we're now going to dive into how we do that. So the starting point is you want to analyze the stories. What is it that we're trying to do? So my original argument that everything is business-led, you go back to the stories and say, what does this give us? And that's the next level down. So you can go back to your chief exec and say, this enables us, all those customers who are using product A, which is mature, to then think about moving to product B and generating more revenue for us. And they'll go, oh, that's great, fantastic. So that brings more revenue, we get it, okay? But then you've got to put in place the architecture to do that, and then defining the data sources, collecting the data sets, linking the data sets, cleaning the data quality, because inevitably, my experience of customer data, your phone numbers, email addresses, they're all wrong. So, the first country in every database, if you ask people to put it in, Afghanistan appears 50,000 times, right, it's not real. We've all seen those problems. So data quality has to be absolutely right in there. Then building the models, and then presenting the data. So far, easy peasy, right? So we can get that. You get to the point, and you can build a dashboard. So we've all been there, okay? So simple. We've got to the point where we've understood that we're generating revenue. We've understand that our single customer view will deliver it. that really is a dashboard that looks at probably the health of our customers. So that's helpful because we can see a profile of how old the customers are by age group. That was interesting at Rank. Everyone had an assumption. We were a little bit surprised. There were quite a few customers who were over 100, and actually that was a data quality issue. So that was so it becomes interesting when you expose the data that people haven't seen before. Anyway, you've all been through that. That's easy. So let's move on a little bit. So in order to do that properly, we all know that data discovery is hard. You're looking at a single customer view. What data should you have in there? So there's all kinds of data sets. So it could be structured data, unstructured data. You might be taking data off, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever it is, your emails and things like that. Bring it all together to do some sentiment analysis. How do customers feel about your products, as well as actually are they buying them, correlating those things. We get all of that. Data discovery is not easy. Once you've got it, then you're going to iterate, because you build a version of a single customer view, you've got to go through again. And all of this is experimental, it's hard. Documentation, I don't need to ask who loves documenting, because no one loves doing that stuff. But it has to be done, because downstream, there are a bunch of people that want to get access to this to do things with it. So if we don't document it, if we don't show how it's available, we'll have problems downstream of being able to exploit that. And then the next thing, you need to automate it. And we all know, and I think, for me, it's a truism, if you don't automate everything you do, and some people like doing that to hold a company to ransom. I remember one guy who built a data warehouse. He thought he had a job for life because he was running that, maintaining it, fixing it, everything else. It was the biggest bottleneck in that organization. Automation is king, because if you don't do that, you can't move on to new stuff and generate more value, which is really what we're all about. Okay, so I'm just going to say we're about generating value. Automation enables you to move on to new things, and we'll talk about the organization construct in a minute for doing that. But this is about, if you don't automate the basic data feeds, I've done that, move on, you'll get bored, people leave, so nobody will stay around. So I think it's really important. Do that, move on, do the next thing. And then we all know the more you deliver, the more demand there is. So as soon as you're successful, people come to you and start saying, great, you've solved one problem, can you do this for me, can you do that? You become their favorite person in the organization. We've got a little project, we've got an acquisition, we need to do this, we need to do that. So that's the next problem, is you're then in demand. And if you haven't automated, you will fail. The CEO will look at you and go, well, that's great, you've done a couple of projects, but you're not performing anymore. You used to be good, but you're no longer good. That's not true, just need to automate. And then finally, you need to future-proof. And by that I mean, you never really know what's coming next. We never know what's coming next. New data sets, who knew COVID was coming along, and working out what the impact would be and doing some analytics around that. Where do people live? What sort of a problem is it? Can we still, trade with our customers? Can we go to, a digital customer relationship rather than a physical sort of bricks and mortar? So I would just emphasize that this stuff's hard, and actually that's why the link through to me for this is you've got to have the right tooling in place. Okay, if you want to automate things, go ahead, get the automation tools. They are critical to this. Without this, you will not be as successful as you could be. And if you don't build out the right environment for these things, you'll struggle to continue to succeed. And the more demands there are, the more critical that is. So I mentioned single customer view, just as an example. In my mind, I have this periodic table. If you go back to days of chemistry at school, if you remember that periodic table, and thinking about all the elements, I have a periodic table in mind that says, and it's all about revenue, cost reduction, revenue increase, cost reduction, risk reduction, and everything else. And there are things that you could do against each one of those, right? So they're the same things that we can all do all the time. There's nothing new on that, okay? Probably never will be. So basically, you want to generate more revenue. It's about upsell, cross-sell, sort of getting customers more loyal, then drives more of that. So there's lots of things you can do underneath. But understanding those things, then you can say, how do I do it? What process do I need? What skills do I need? What technology do I need underneath that? But I just want to focus on AI and ML, because I see the previous bit as being a bit more sort of data engineering. We've got the data, we brought it through. So how do we do that? And in my mind, and I don't know whether you can read this, but I'll call a little bit of it out. This is my sort of AI machine learning maturity model. So key things to note about it: complexity. So the more complex it is at the top, and across the right, it's trust. Now for me that's critical, because if you start doing things that people you don't have that contract with your CEO, he doesn't trust your data, then you can't do those things top right. Okay, but when you're really smart, you've delivered 5 or 6 things and he goes, I get you, then you can start doing things with a higher level of trust. But they are necessarily more complex. So around that journey, I would suggest you start with some low risk, quick wins. Okay, because that's the bit that enables you to do things where you can prove your infrastructure, prove that you've got the resources, the tooling and everything else. And those really are around, fraud detection. If you find something there, everyone goes, yippee, you found something. And that's great news. The more you can find, the better, and that's really good. So fixing things is always a good place to start with AI and machine learning, identifying things that other people couldn't pick out before. Top right, and as we move up, you're moving into, and we'll go on to that in a second, you move into far more complex things that if you start doing those, there is a massive downside. Okay, so part of my argument here in terms of the technology is just beware of that risk of any environment you put in place. Solve the easy things, the things that you found them, you'll get credit for, you won't get kicked when they go wrong. You can do those things later when you've got a bit of a reputation. So my argument is that you start off with reporting, so you'll see that there's a greater value for those things at the top. So when you start off with reporting, that's straightforward. You're collecting your data, you put it into a data set, you can report it, people can see it, critique it. Generally, it might be operational reporting, right? You give it to salespeople, they'll soon tell you whether it's wrong, whether their commissions are wrong or whatever they are, they'll shout at you. But that reporting is critical. Most organizations get that right. The biggest challenge is too much reporting, and it's not focused on the roles that people need it for. Okay, so once you get that, then you start telling them a few things they wouldn't get otherwise. So insights, these numbers may be low in one region, relative to others, they're actually quite high. So then you do relative performance, all kinds of things, historic performance. That gives people insights, seasonality, everything else. And that's fine, that's still, in my mind, that's good BI, right? So nothing more than that. But then you move into forecasting, and suddenly you start bringing in a different perspective. You now need to start using data science and AI to start looking at data sets, bringing out some perspectives that other people don't have. Prediction is really smart, because at that point, you're really putting yourself out there. That's really high on that top right trust things. So if you're predicting something and you get it wrong, someone's going to come and kick you. So at that point, you have to know your data sources are good, your governance is good, and that your tooling is good, and that you can repeat it again and again, okay? And it doesn't matter if you don't get it perfectly right, because, and we'll come on to approach in a minute, of innovation and how you can experiment and how you have to get the business's blessing to experiment with your data, building out those data sets and everything else. So finally, innovation, and that kind of is that top of the pyramid thing, right? We all know top of the pyramid is the most exciting thing, and innovation is getting to the point where you can actually bring something to your chief exec that he didn't know was possible. Hopefully it's good, hopefully it's not bad news, but innovation could be using a bit of IoT, could be all kinds of things, and it's collecting data sets that they're not used to doing. So at the bottom, you're collecting data that everyone knows and loves. They're used to the systems, they understand where it comes from. At the top, you're doing things, maybe bringing external data in, all kinds of things. So stuff they wouldn't have seen before, and generating new ideas. And all of that is challenging, because the further you go up the stack, the more complex your architecture is, the more complex the skill set is. So you need people with different ways of thinking. You can't just create the same old things. And in order to move up, going back to my previous points, you needed to have automated those early things to give you the capacity to move up the stack. So it's almost like you can imagine those, and I wouldn't want to put gates in because that then feels like a method or whatever, but you can almost imagine you go through each stage to get the blessing to move on to the next one, to go to the next one, and that is your top right when you're innovating. You are absolutely doing something that was not done before. And you cannot do that generally without AI and ML. Okay, that's my take. It's very difficult to innovate using data that other people can get, put in a spreadsheet, and everything else. So that is part of the argument for using AI and ML. You're telling people either the data sets are too big, too complex, too varied. You know, we were talking about big data for me, probably shouldn't say it here, but anyway, it's all about variety, velocity, veracity, and the volume, right? So you've got all of those things. When data's coming at you fast, real time, big data sets, it's very difficult for people to analyze it. That's when you need AI and ML. So I think building the trust, building the confidence, you can then start innovating, bring stuff that they didn't have before. And that's also the most exciting thing, right? Those are the shiny toys that the CEO asks you for, but you can't give if you haven't done the work in place. So then we're moving to this top right of the maturity model. And I think, looking at complex analysis, so you try large data sets, you want to analyze those. No human can do it, it's too much, it's too difficult. So absolutely, drive that from machine learning and AI. Making recommendations, as I say, you've got to have that trust, but that is about experimentation. You try driving a recommendation, build a model, and we'll come back to how we build those models in a second. But it is then sort of, as I mentioned, IoT, but also if I gave you an example from investment banking, so for an investment bank, they want to be able to do trading, and for trading, you need to be ahead of other people. Because if you try buying a stock or a currency or whatever behind other people, the price has gone up, you've missed the opportunity. So therefore you need your servers to be in close proximity to the servers of the exchange, therefore you get low latency, and the only way you can do that trading is with a wonderful algorithm. So again, you're doing that, but that's very high risk. You are doing trading without any person involved whatsoever. So that for me is that top right, okay? You are making a decision, no humans involved, they've looked at it, that's the right thing to do, given the parameters, away you go. And then suddenly you'll find that you've invested in 20 billion of something, or the price has gone up or down. So it is very risky, but that's where you bring all the capabilities of AI and ML to bear. But against that, if you haven't automated everything else, if your data quality is poor, you'll be making a decision against a market that's dropping when actually, you think, well, that's not the time to buy. So absolutely critical. So a few things in the kind of last 7 or 8 minutes on how do you ensure you're a winner in that. And I think the first thing is you need a method, okay? And I'm just going to say this. If you try developing AI, machine learning, without the business understanding, so it's a business benefit, if they don't understand what you're doing as you're going through that project or program, they can't buy into it. They can't wait 6 months for something to come out the other end. They want to know, what stage are we at? And you have to say, so my bottom line is there, it's actually experiment. So forget waterfall, forget agile, those things go out the window. This is a data process. My argument is a data process is different. Agile is not experimental, this is experimental. You have to turn around and get their agreement up front. It is a contract, their contract up front. We are experimenting, we're playing with your data, we're playing with your company, hope you don't mind, boss. And so at that point, it is experimental. Because if you don't do that and you don't deliver, they'll go, well, you failed. And actually, failure you learn a lot from. So with any experiment you do, you learn, hopefully you generate some value. The second thing is you generate some learning about what you're going to do going forward, and actually that learning can be just as important. So I think it's absolutely critical. So this process takes you through what's the business challenge, then you do research around it. Okay, so we want to do some cross-selling, do some research, how do we do that, which products are relevant, how do we do that? Then the next thing is you construct a hypothesis of how you're going to do it, which then helps you, you then analyze the data behind that, build and test it, then report the results, and the report might be, we've done this, but if we had more data sets, we could do this. So you then want to think about bringing in more data, or changing the data sets, or changing the reference points for that model. So that's why I'm saying it's experimental. You need to say to them, well, we've done a pretty good job, but actually now we know how to make it better next time. And that is as important as the original thing. And the learning for the organization is that, because what you'll end up saying is your sales guys need to capture this data up front. Every time they talk to a customer, they need to do this because they're putting in, abstract text, and we need real values in there to do our cross-selling. We need to know what they're interested in. So actually, it's important that, this is what I'm saying, it's important you go back to the business and say, these are things you need to do too. It's not all about us, we can help you, you have to do your stuff as well as we do. So that's absolutely critical. And then deploy, and if you deploy, if you run your own models, it's the same with the data engineering problem. If you run your own models, you'll do two, and then you'll be running them forever. And you'll never get on to number 3, 4, 5. So we need to get to the point where we understand how to do that. So this is my view on a data capability model. Now you can read this in two ways. It's all the capabilities that any data organization needs to have. So it could be an organization chart. I suspect you'd translate it into any org model you want. It doesn't have to be people with those roles in those boxes. But just to talk you through it, so you start up off bottom left, you've got data science and AI, machine learning, okay? So you have a bunch of people in there who are doing modeling, data wrangling, all those things we're familiar with, okay? Then second one along in the middle, so data engineering. So they go and acquire the data, bring it in, work out where it sits, make sure the governance and quality are right. Data architecture, so all of those you get already, right? So, but there are capabilities you have to have there. Then you have your data community. So they are the people you're asking, are we doing the right thing for you? They might be your business users or whatever, but they are also more than business users. You're now telling them that they're not doing a good enough job in capturing that data up front. So it's no longer a reactive environment, it has to be proactive. You actually have to instruct them to do a better job. You want their job descriptions to reflect the fact that they are now responsible for data quality. It's not just a data quality team that magically go and fix all their rubbish afterwards, okay? They have to know that. So data community has a key role. Data exec, data privacy officer and CISO, we all know that they have a role on oversight on this. And I guess data privacy and ethics, again, people who can explain the models we built, make sure we're doing the right thing with them. But really critical, data product management. Anything we build in data should be a product. Okay, it sounds a bit evangelical. You build it, you improve it, you maintain it. We then get into saying it's a product, it's fine, version 1, version 2, very different approach. And that product should be owned by people in the business. Okay, they own the roadmap for those products. Doesn't matter, single customer view could be owned by head of marketing. Doesn't matter, they will manage the roadmap, priorities for it, then you are truly business driven. The other bit I'd point out is data ops, because actually data science and machine learning, you build stuff, you need to hand it over to someone who will run it. They need to have the skills to do that, otherwise you run out of capacity. So then we need diversity of thinking, and I just want to call that out. So IQ and EQ we get, the others you may not. So practical quotient, you just need people who get on and do stuff. So if you want data quality fixing, don't bring in someone who will come up with theories about how you do it. You need someone who will go the hard graft of fixing it. You need people who get on and do things without question, maybe a different mindset and everything else. The final one is AQ, okay? If anyone ever says, I am a Python developer, sorry, you're not. You're a developer, maybe Python today, maybe something else tomorrow. So if you get stuck in a rut with one technology, one process, if you can't move across platforms, that's a challenge. So AQ is absolutely critical. We know this industry changes. You don't have to look around here. It changes so quickly. Adaptability. So if I'm recruiting people, it's all about adaptability. You're doing this today, tomorrow it'll vary. You need to be able to move forward. You need to train, always continuous improvement around those things. So I think it's absolutely critical. And when you look at explainer roles that are coming out, explain my AI and ML models, you need people who can then go and talk to the business and empathize with them. So you need really high EQ. So different things, different skills for different roles. Automate data engineering. I probably ranted about, I always rant about that, it's a good one. But anyway, you need to automate. And then finally, I mentioned, you need to cross the line, be proactive with the business. Don't let them steer you, because I guess you probably know more than them. So be bold and do that. So that's all. And if you want to talk more, so I'm sitting over on the Westgate Q-Bowl stand, come along, have a chat. You know, they have expertise around automation and everything else. So but I'm very happy to talk to anyone further if you want to have a chat. Thank you very much. You can take your headsets off and breathe now.